Hello, my name is Lizzie Karen, and welcome to the channel I created on my dreams of Atlantis. This episode is about the stonework of the ancients. It is part of a series on stonework, and this is all the information that I've gleaned from my many dream regressions throughout my lifetime. Because it's such a big topic, I'm splitting the subject into the following topics for the episodes. So the first one is types of location. In future episodes, I'll talk about specific building techniques and then specifics about the actual things that were necessary for doing the stonework. For example, the machines needed, how the blocks were transported, how polishing was achieved. Actually, you won't believe how this was done. It will not be how you expect, but I'll get back to that in another episode. I don't know how many episodes it's going to require, but let's get started. Please note that I may do other types of episodes between these ones on stone cutting and building, just to add some variety for both me, the creator, and you, the audience. So this is the first episode, and we're looking at the types of places where the Tantals, aka Atlanteans, did the stonework. So first I'll list out what are the indications to show how likely a site would be to be worthy of the work of the ancients. And I must point out that the examples of types of locations that I will give are not necessarily sites I believe are of Tantal, but if there are any that I think were of Tantal origin, like Petra, I will indicate as such. So, preferences and purposes for a site. There was a very strong preference for building in places that are inaccessible. So, examples of the types of places are, number one, basins that are nestled between mountains or inaccessible valleys, in gorges as well. So a nice example of that is the irregular Valley. It's in Cappadocia, which is a place where I'm pretty sure the ancients would find very interesting in general. The next type of location are the ones that are on top of inaccessible rock formations like mesas and buttes or even islands. So examples of this are Aleppo Citadel. I'm quite sure that I have seen that in my dreams, not with the same things built on the top of it, however, but it just looks so familiar to me. Another location, as an example, is, I'm not sure if I can say this right, Fahada Butte. And another one, Baidacheng, which is an island. And of course, the perfect example for being hard to get to, Mount Lico. The third type of location is mountains. Mountains are either already flat top or can be flat topped, or should I say just topped, like Machu Picchu or maybe Table Mountain. The higher and less accessible, the better. So Machu Picchu is definitely one of the ones that I feel that the ancients had a hand in. Anyway, the fourth is bedrock areas which are next to fresh water, like Giza, which, as you already know, I think the ancients have had a hand in, and Lake Titicaca, which also I believe that the ancients have had a hand in. As an aside, I found out something amazing about Lake Titicaca recently from my friend Roberto, who has been and spent quite a bit of time at Lake Titicaca, and I was telling him about some of my dreams, and it looks like we've identified a location between us. So I'll leave that for another episode, but I was so excited about it. But I'll get back to my proper episode now. The next type of location are the hard rock locations that are suitable for carving out whole buildings or carving buildings into caves, or like Petra, or the Ellora caves, or the Ajanta caves, or even Lalibela, or the Kailasa temple. And there's also the Eski Gurmusla monastery, and I'm sure I did not say that right, but hey, they're all examples. Petra is definitely one from my dreams. The others, some of them look vaguely familiar, but I wouldn't like to say whether they were a direct influence of the ancients or not. Then, of course, there's the last type, which are regions where there's nice solid rock ground, which is suitable for underground construction. So the kinds of examples would be the Serapeum of Saqqara, or maybe even Derinkuyu. But I suspect that most of these sites are yet to be found because they're very well hidden, are the ones that are underground. Okay, let's quickly talk about what isn't the work of the ancients. Right, any kind of brickwork, not the ancients. Any small cut rock blocks, definitely not the ancients. Any badly fitted blocks, definitely not the ancients, unless it's inside a larger construction project and used as fill. Then there's the massive blocks that are not cleanly cut. They're not the ancients, but they could be using partial knowledge from a previous time, like Stonehenge. And then, of course, there's the big round rock balls. And sorry to tell you this, guys, but they're natural. They're not the ancients. Another thing is obelisks. If you see obelisks that are ridiculously large, made completely in stone and of a hard stone, all one piece, that was the ancients. Others may have carved into them at some later time, or should I say scratched into them, but the actual obelisk is likely to be from the ancients. Same with the giant statues or the giant boxes. If they're high on Mohs scale, they're likely to be of the ancients. In terms of things like inscriptions, if it isn't obvious when you see the kind of inscriptions on them, they probably weren't the ancients. So if the people making the inscriptions had trouble making the inscriptions, they really did not make the actual statue. So if inscriptions are scratched in, they are not the original manufacturer, let's say. Okay, so back to building projects. The first of the great building projects was Tantal, obviously, Atlantis. Its location was chosen because it already had naturally suitable terrain, and the buildings were block construction, and the blocks were cut mainly from the bedrock where the canals were cut out. The blocks were megalithic in size, and only the most beautiful white, red, or black blocks were used. They were mainly white. All cutting at this time was done with machines, and I will definitely do an episode on the machines. It's included in episode number... well, it's coming anyway. As for the sites for the university, they would be chosen not just as being a good location for the university, but also if the rock is suitable for direct carving. So examples of this are Thebe and Neb, which are 100% just buildings cut out of the bedrock. the sort of thing that you see in Petra. So that's a good example of the way it was done. Other sites where it's cut into the rock are those that are sunk to ground level. And the reason for this technique is because it's easier to fill the area and then cover it up than to put plants over it, and no one would ever know it had ever been there. The university called Peosa, which is the Institute of Water, was built this way. So it was sunk into the ground. We did not tend to build anything close to the coast. I mean, there was exceptions, but we did favour lakes and rivers. They were always good to build near. So, next subject. Why were specific techniques chosen for particular sites? Well, if a site was considered to be permanent, then the building techniques tended to be directly into rock, or if this was not possible, then using massive stone blocks. If a site was considered temporary, consideration and thought went into how it might be dismantled at a later time. The preferred technique used prefabricated blocks that were a byproduct, let's say, of other rock cutting techniques. We hated to waste, actually, anything or leave rubbish behind. So that includes the remains of our cutting activities. And there were some machines that did both the cutting and the removal of waste all in one go, whereas other machines, it had to be a separate process. But I'll discuss that when I get to the machine episode. So now onto the subject of why the permanent versus the temporary locations. So obviously all the institutes, plus Tantal itself, were permanent, whereas the temporary locations were for things like the animal retreats, the places, the holiday places where people would go in order to meet animals. Like, I wanted a cat. That's one of my other episodes, by the way. I'd go to a cat retreat and I'd spend a lot of time there until a cat chose me. Anyway, that was one of the temporary locations. The other temporary location was for the watchers, and that was obviously temporary as well, because quite often a watcher location would be moved. It would be taken away and put somewhere else. And there were plenty of both of the animal retreats and the watcher locations, and they were all around the world, mainly in the temperate zone, but they were still in all kinds of places. So the preparatory techniques for the permanent and the temporary were essentially the same. Before any building was done, a site would be assessed for stability. It would then be flattened. Sometimes this was a relatively small job, whereas other times it was done on a massive scale. For example, the removal of the top of a mountain or the flattening of a plateau. So a small job would be one where there is a natural rock, like I'm going to use the example of Uluru because it's in Australia and everybody knows it. So that would have been the sort of place the ancients would have loved. But they would have flattened the top, and then they'd have built a temporary facility on the top of it. So these places are called mesas, or I think buttes, and they were the ones that the ancients really liked because of their strength. They tended to be of harder rock because any soft rock that was around them had already been eroded by whether it's water or sand or wind or whatever. So most of the work was already done by nature. So preparing these sorts of sites was great, and they were really hard to access. So an example of one that I believe is of Tantal origin is Aleppo. It really looks like one from a dream regression I had. So I have a very strong feeling about Aleppo. I hope to go there one day. Anyway, a bigger job would be a large plateau or taking the top of a mountain, as I said. and the machines for this sort of thing were enormous. But I think it's better I just come to that later in another episode. So after preparing the site to be flat, a plan would be laid out and then indentations cut into the rock for seating the key blocks. This is not so obvious on the permanent sites because there are big blocks sitting in the indentations, but where a location was used and then the blocks removed, the resultant indentations in the flattened base are very obvious. It should be easy to find old abandoned sites based on this alone, but there won't be any remains of any kind there. The ancients were very thorough about cleaning up after themselves. If there are any sites where blocks or temporary blocks exist, so these are the prefabricated ones, that basically means that some disaster struck before the blocks or the buildings the blocks were made up of, that the buildings were made up of, were dismantled. So the only example I can think of in terms of this is Pumapunku. Have I said that right? It's pretty clear. They've got the prefabricated blocks that I remember, and they're just strewn around. They would normally have been taken away. So it must have been something terrible happened. Anyway, that is the end of the first episode on stonework, stone cutting, building, etc. And the next episode will be on the specific building techniques. So that's like the polygonal block construction, megalithic site construction, and the prefabricated blocks. I'll also touch on stone softening and geopolymers. So I will catch you all next time. Thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye.